we will continue with changing the environmental narrative in Colorado with Patricia Ferrero, the manager of Protégete at Conservation Colorado. Patricia is a LEED certified architect, in addition to being an expert in many worlds in the nonprofit realm, continuing to insist on climate justice in multiple spaces in multiple ways. And we are honored to have her help us frame this new narrative.
Hi all, thank you so much. My name is Patricia Ferrero, and I'm the Leadership Development Manager with Protégete at Conservation Colorado. We work with the Latino community to ensure that we are creating from the ground up Latino-centered solutions that are going to benefit all of Colorado. And we do this through leadership development, education, and advocacy. Before we get started, I wanted to just pose a question really quickly and ask, what are the stereotypes that you associate with environmentalism? And I'll give you guys maybe 15, 20 seconds to talk with the person next to you. Introduce yourself to your neighbor if you haven't done that already, and just say, what do you think of when you think of an environmentalist? Let's bring it back. Thank you so much. How many people here identify themselves as being environmentalists? Raise your hand. That is, how many people here identify themselves as environmentalists? This is great. I can tell you that when I do leadership development trainings with our community, oftentimes when I ask them this question, no one raises their hand. And that is because usually when we think of environmentalists, we think there's been studies that have shown that the majority of respondents, when asked this question in a survey, will identify environmentalists as white, wealthy, and outdoorsy. And our community oftentimes don't see themselves reflected in this. In the narrative and the definition of environmentalism that is understood at our national level, we have baked in a financial barrier that prevents our community from taking part. But when we've seen the data of this survey, we see that despite the fact that Latinos are reported or are thought to have the lowest climate change perception, they actually report having the most concern. And this is true with people who live in lower income communities and most other communities of color, except for, if you look up there, the white community is the only one who actually has a higher perception than actual concern. So why is this? Well, for one thing, we see the effects of pollution in our own backyards. So if you've ever been to Commerce City, you have seen Suncor Refinery. Suncor, the community that lives around there is 60 to 80% Latino. The housing is 75% cheaper. There is a higher incidence of respiratory and cardiovascular disease. It's in a community. This is not an accident that this is in a community of low income and Latino immigrants. And this is also something that we see across the state. So in areas that are 25% Latino or higher, we also see that there is a higher, that there's higher concentrations of air pollution and oil and gas facilities. And if we were to zoom in even closer, we might see that it's even more pronounced at the local level. So we see that we have a higher global warming risk perception because of our stronger egalitarian worldview, stronger connection to family and friends, including frequent communication with folks outside of the US, stronger association to the Democratic Party. But at the same time, the traditional environmental narrative just doesn't reflect the Latina experience in the United States. And we see that organizations and the environmental movement just does not reflect us. And if we don't see ourselves within these spaces, we don't see that this is a space that's meant for us. We also see that we're an increased risk. So oftentimes when there's wildfires, our communities do not have access to the emergency services. Information is not translated, which means that our communities also are not receiving the benefits that are out there to support communities who are at risk of wildfires. And it's also part of our cultural practices. I don't know if anybody here has experienced similar things, but if you open up your grandma's refrigerator, you'll see that there's a lot of tubs of margarine. There isn't that much margarine in there, though. And I don't know if anybody here has ever experienced seeing a tin of cookies, going up there so excited, and finding something else like flour in there. Very sad. But that's because we also have a culture of reusing, of living in multi-generational households, of sharing vehicles, of using multimodal transit, and of lower energy consumption. I do not remember a time when I was younger leaving a room and my dad not yelling at me to turn off the lights. So we know that our health is connected to the well-being of our Madre Tierra. There is no separation. If our Mother Earth is sick, that means that we're sick as well. And so what we need to do as an environmental movement is change this narrative. We need to acknowledge that there's intersectionality in all of these issues, that the environmental movement is not just about mountains and trees, even though those are beautiful and we also want to experience them. It's also about criminal justice and the fact that our communities don't have access to a lot of the resources like bus stops or sidewalks or crosswalks. And that often means that if we use the street incorrectly, we get criminalized. It's also a huge immigration issue. The reason why we see such an increase in immigration is also because the stuff that we're doing in this country, the development that we do here, is having a huge impact in Latin America. The Colorado River is supposed to reach Mexico, and oftentimes it doesn't. That means that in northern Mexico, there are communities that are struggling to survive. So we need to reinvent what this movement looks like. We need to acknowledge that our communities are amongst the most impacted, but the least associated with the environmental movement. And these stereotypes have a real-life implication on how we navigate the world. Oftentimes, our decision makers, our leaders do not come to Latino communities to find out what solutions could look like, because they believe that Latinos don't care. But we do. We just don't think that this is what environmentalism means or what it looks like. And so it is up to organizations like Conservation Colorado, the organization that I work for, to change the narrative that they have disproportionately been benefiting from historically by excluding communities. They need to be the ones who are rewriting the environmental narrative and changing the systems to make sure that we have an equity lens and a health lens when we're talking about climate change. And so this is the type of work that we do with our community. We take them to advocate and to testify at the state capitol. Oftentimes, this is the first time that they've ever stepped into the state capitol, even though that is their home. The state capitol is our house. And those people who are working there, they work for us. We're their bosses. But we don't see it that way. And so we try to ensure that there is an understanding that we have the power to make change, that the public lands that surround that are all around the state, they are also our responsibility to take care of them, and that we have every right to also enjoy those public lands, and that if we work as a community, we're able to make a difference. So some of the work that we've done has been with students. We've taken them to canvass for candidates at the state legislature, to do park cleanups, to write letters. And as a result, from some of the work that we've done with these students, they have wanted to also make a change within their community. And what they did was that they decided that they wanted to do a recycling program in their school. This is a school in Thornton. The high occupancy buildings don't get recycling services. And they saw that as being a huge waste, since at their school they were also producing a lot of trash. And so for the first time ever, we had students of color, young students, go to the Thornton City Council and ask their decision makers to make a difference, that they were doing something within their own community. They were teaching the students in their school how to recycle. They were taking that recycling to a recycling facility every 2 weeks, and they saw that that was getting in the way of their learning, that this was not a responsibility that was on them as individuals, but that it was on the City Council to make a change. And as a result, from having this conversation, presenting to the City Council, I can tell you one thing, they were freaked out. They were not used to seeing students. The City Council in Thornton is used to seeing maybe 2 or 3 people, the same people. And these were new, young, active, powerful brown faces who were coming to the City Council and telling them that they were not doing their job. And that's what decision makers need to see, they need to be a little bit scared, but they also need to be able to partner with communities and find out what the solutions are, because these students are the ones who know the solutions much better than their city council members. So these are the stories. Our stories are our voice, and they are powerful. They're our weapons in our fight for justice. So, when we're taking care of our Mother Earth, it depends on all of us. And we all have a role to play. So here we have one of our students. She was able to go with us to Washington, D.C. to advocate at the federal level. And she's just expressing how proud she was of putting in her grain of sand in this huge movement, but that it takes everyone to do it. So to finish up, I just ask all of you, what is your story? And how can you be one of the pieces in this huge movement to ensure that we have a more equitable movement that is going to center on our leaders who know about the work that's being done because of their lived experience? Thank you.
A series of voices from around the state. One of the things that's really easy to do, particularly when we're here in the Denver region, is think that everything is about the Front Range. But life is different in the mountain communities, particularly in some of the smaller communities. Whoa. Just a second. Okay. All right. So we are going to turn our attention here to our screen and watch a series of voices. We are so grateful to our supporting organization of Cultivando for the gift of their incredible environmental justice documentary. If you have not seen it, please contact them. Please check out their material on the table. Their director of environmental justice is here. Araceli, can you say hi? Araceli Navarro. So please speak with her later about the incredible work that they're doing in Cultivando and Commerce City. And so thank you for that. And thank you for all of our speakers, Ian Tafoya, Amanda Sandoval, Troy McHugh, Steve Fisher, and Tori Jarvis, who all participated and contributed to providing us a broad story